Welcome, everyone. Welcome all of you who are here present in Richmond at St. Paul's at 815 Grace Street, and welcome to all of you who are joining us from afar, who are watching through social media. We're glad that you are all here. My name is Charlie, and I am the rector of St. Paul's. Some of you may or may not know that I grew up on a farm in eastern North Carolina. And one of the byproducts of growing up with a farming father was that there was never a shortage of jobs. There was always something to do, which makes it very hard to relax. I think I remember a total of 3 family vacations when I was growing up. And my brother and my sister and I definitely suffer from a spirit of restlessness, an inability to kind of sit and rest and relax, because when we were young, we never wanted our father to catch us doing nothing. If he did, he would put us to work. For example, and let me just say that I have been and always will be in therapy about this, so don't worry about me. I'm getting help. But it was not unusual. It was not unusual in late spring or early summer for my father to pull up in his truck, and he would honk the horn, which was always the signal to go out, and he would say, "Get in." And so I'd get in, and we would drive, and he would drop me off in the middle of a field, in the middle of nowhere, and give me a hoe. And so, working alongside usually 1 or 2 other quiet men, we would chop weeds. Hours and hours. In other words, I hated it. I hated every moment of it. Oh, just enjoy being out there with nature. Say your prayers, he might have said to me. But no way. If peace and if solitude, and dare I say, if the presence of holiness was ever to be found, it was not going to be found in the middle of some field, in the middle of nowhere. But wait a minute. I think, if I'm hearing the gospel correctly, the same gospel that you just heard, this is exactly where God shows up tonight, doesn't God? In the middle of a field, in the middle of nowhere. This is where God finds the shepherds. So it points us to what tonight is all about, and what this whole mystery of the incarnation is about. It's about God startlingly and surprisingly showing up. After all, I don't think that those shepherds went out there expecting a visit from the angel. They did not get a text message. They were there. But on that night, a part of God's dramatic entrance into our world is directly connected to those shepherds. So I think the shepherds have something really pivotal to tell us about what God is doing in this night, in the mystery and the holiness of this night. Why the shepherds? Why? Why do they feature so prominently in our story? To the extent that, can you imagine how many people have dressed up as shepherds tonight? They feature prominently, and I wonder why. Let's figure it out. The first thing to take into account is that the shepherds were about as low on the social scale as you could get. One scholar tells us that shepherds were, quote, people whom we would not expect to be worshiping Jesus. Because of their jobs, shepherds normally didn't make it to church on Sundays. They didn't observe Sabbath practices. Shepherds were seen as ignorant, irreligious, immoral, crude, vulgar, and they smelled. Close quote. So why in the world? Why in God's name? Why in God's name would these be the very first witnesses to the way that God would forever act and be in the world? Well, I believe it was to the shepherds because it is to such persons as the shepherds that the good news is truly intended. You see, in that day, the world was occupied by Rome. It was occupied by power. There were people living in luxurious houses, and their tables were filled with wine and fruit and meat. They were powerful. They rode horses. They could conquer with armies. And they got to bathe in herb-scented baths with servants and soft towels. But God didn't appear to those folks. Instead, God chose to appear to the shepherds. The angel said, I'm bringing you good news. You. What I'm doing this night. What I'm doing for you. I'm sending love into the world. I'm sending justice into the world. I'm sending equality into the world. I'm sending compassion into the world. And I'm doing it for you who are standing in the middle of a field, in the middle of nowhere. And just to drive the point home, Luke's gospel tells us that the angels say that the child's going to be born in a specific place. And the angel is like, hey, you need to go find him. There's a baby being born, and I need you to go look for him. This is my translation. And the shepherds are like, oh, okay, how are we going to know where to find him? What's he going to look like? Great question, right? And so the angels say, oh, yeah, he'll be the one wrapped in swaddling clothes. And then the shepherds are like, duh, angels, all babies are wrapped in swaddling clothes. And the angels are like, right. Let's give it another shot. The baby you're looking for is going to be in a manger. What an interesting detail. A manger of all places. You can kind of feel the shepherd's wheels turning. It's not a fancy crib made out of gold. It's not a majestic bed with a gold leaf eagle. No, the angel insists, it's a manger. The word's right there in the Greek. And then the shepherds are like, oh, I know mangers. I've been around a few mangers. I know what mangers look like. Can you imagine? God enters the world exactly where the shepherds would know where to look. And that's the incarnation. That's what this whole mystery is about. God being placed right into the midst of where all of us normal people would know where to look. God is born as a vulnerable baby in a not-so-sanitary setting and chooses to be found by the likes of you and me, not the rich and powerful and famous. God is born right into the midst of unpaid bills, mortgages, loans, and insecure jobs, and food insecurity. Justice and love and hope and equality and justice move right smack dab into the center of all the folks. Hashtag all of us. Because God chose to be born a vulnerable baby in a place where only the shepherds would know to look, no part of humanity is left untouched. And God's heart beats full and fast with all of us. I think somebody said, and all flesh shall see it together. Tonight, the divine moves from the temples and the towers into the fields. The divine is placed into the hands of those who migrate, who move on and off other people's property. One rabbi says that shepherds were not even allowed to be witnesses because they spent their time moving all about. They probably roamed. They probably even had to steal from time to time to be fed. On this night, it's the shepherds that are our representatives to the hosts of heaven, because guess what? There is a shepherd in every single one of us. Who among us has not stood wondering and wandering where we would go next and what to do? How will we find him? That's the question asked by those shepherds 2,000 years ago. And church, let me tell you, that is the same question that I ask and that you ask and that we all ask every single day. Where do we look for God? How will we recognize Jesus, the Holy? Remember that God does not point to high and lofty places. God points to the familiar. Look for us, God says. Look for us in the places you may have seen 100,000 times. Look for us in the sun and the moon and the mountains and the mangers. Look for us. Look for us in billy goats and beaches and hummingbirds and crying babies. Look for us, God says, in the cries for freedom on the streets and in those that you gather around your Christmas dining room table. Look for us in the excitedness of your dog when you get home from work. Look for us as the dough rises and as darkness turns to light. Look for us, God says. Look for us in the straight and in the gay and in the trans and in all shades in between. Look for us when you're moving and roaming and wandering. And don't forget to look for us in the deep, deep inhale of your very own breath. That's where God likes to hang out. All of those places and many more. Because the promise, ever since we started this whole thing called Advent, is that his name would be Emmanuel. God with us. God with you. God with me. And that's been the promise all along, and right here, right in the middle of us all, in a manger, the promise is fulfilled. You're not alone. I will be with you, even and especially if you're in the middle of a field, in the middle of nowhere. You and me, God says, as it was, as it is, and as it forever shall be, world without end. Amen.